The rain was falling hard over London when Jamie Dornan's phone buzzed. He was sitting in the back seat of his car, fresh out of a long shoot, his mind heavy with exhaustion. The city lights smeared against the windows, neon colors bleeding into the night. He almost ignored the notification, until he saw the words that made his stomach twist. Confirmed. Dakota Johnson and Chris Martin are officially back together. He stared at the headline for a long moment. The screen glowed bright in the dark car, the photo beneath it showing Dakota smiling, her hand laced with Chris's. It was the kind of image that should have meant nothing to him. After all, they had gone their separate ways years ago, at least, that was what he kept telling himself. But the sharp ache that spread through his chest said otherwise. He locked his phone and sat back, exhaling deeply. Outside, the rain tapped against the glass in quick, nervous rhythms, like his heart. It wasn't jealousy, he told himself. Not really. It was just surprise. Or maybe regret, or both. The driver's voice broke the silence. Home, sir? Jamie hesitated. No, he said finally. Just drive. As the car rolled through the wet streets, his thoughts spiraled. Dakota and Chris. He had known they'd been seeing each other again, but confirmed. That word hit differently. It made everything real. He closed his eyes, letting the memories come. It had been years since they'd filmed 50 Shades. Years since those long days of intensity, of connection so sharp it felt electric. The world had called it chemistry. But to him, it had felt like something deeper, something that scared him. He had always admired Dakota's spirit, her confidence, the way she made chaos look effortless. On set, she had this rare ability to make everyone around her feel seen, especially him. They had shared long conversations, laughter that felt too natural, silences that said more than words. He remembered once, during a break between takes, she had asked quietly, "Do you ever think people meet at the wrong time?" He had laughed it off then. But he thought about that line for years. Now, seeing her name beside Chris Martin's again, it all came rushing back. That quiet question, the things they never said aloud. He opened his phone again. The article was everywhere, trending on every platform. Photos of Dakota and Chris at a concert, laughing, whispering into each other's ears. The headlines called it, Hollywood's sweetest reunion. The comments beneath were merciless. Jamie must be kicking himself right now. You can't fake chemistry like that. Dakota always had someone else in her heart. He scrolled once, then threw the phone onto the seat beside him. God, he muttered, pressing his fingers to his temple. It wasn't the headlines that hurt, he'd learned to live with those. It was the way they made him remember the one thing he'd spent years trying to forget. That somewhere between the scenes and the scripts, his feelings had crossed a line he never intended to cross. The car stopped at a red light. Across the street, a billboard glowed, a new movie poster. His face stared back at him, perfectly lit, perfectly poised. He almost laughed at the irony. The world saw the man in control, the star with the perfect life. But inside, all he felt was the quiet burn of something unresolved. He thought about calling Amelia, his wife, but the words wouldn't come. What would he even say? Hey, I'm fine. Just saw the woman I once couldn't stop thinking about fall in love with someone else again. It sounded pathetic even in his head. So instead, he stayed quiet. The driver spoke again. Is everything all right, Mr. Dornan? Jamie forced a smile into the rearview mirror. Yeah, he said softly. Everything's fine. But when the light turned green, he didn't tell the driver to go home. He just said, keep driving. They drove through the city for over an hour. Past the glowing theaters, the crowded pubs, the quiet streets where no one knew his name. The rain kept falling, relentless and cold. At one point, he stopped at the river. The driver waited as he stepped out into the drizzle, pulling his coat tighter. The Thames shimmered under the streetlights, calm, detached, endless. He watched the water for a long time. He thought of Dakota again, of her laughter, her unfiltered honesty, the way she made even silence feel full. He thought of how their story had never been written properly, only hinted at, whispered about, denied. Then, finally, he whispered to the night, "So that's how it ends." No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet ache. The city kept moving, but Jamie stayed still, letting the rain soak through his jacket until it didn't matter anymore. For years, he had been the one in control of his image, his emotions, his words. But for the first time in a long while, Jamie Dornan couldn't control the one thing that mattered most. He still cared. The morning after, Jamie woke to a storm of headlines. His name was everywhere again, only this time, it wasn't for a new film or a red carpet appearance. It was for his reaction. Jamie Dornan furious over Dakota Johnson and Chris Martin reunion. Insiders say Dornan lost his cool after seeing the news. He stared at the screen in disbelief. Someone from the set had clearly talked, said he'd stormed off after reading the article. He hadn't stormed anywhere, he had just left. Quietly, but in Hollywood, silence was always rewritten as chaos. He tossed the phone aside and rubbed his face. Furious, he muttered to himself. They always need me to be furious. Amelia knocked softly before entering the room. She carried a cup of coffee, her expression calm, though her eyes were searching. "It's everywhere," she said simply. "I know." She sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. "You okay?" Jamie hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted. "It's strange. I shouldn't feel anything, but I do." Amelia nodded slowly. There was no accusation in her voice, just quiet understanding. "You cared about her," she said. "It's okay to admit that." He met her gaze, surprised by the gentleness in her tone. "I did," he said softly. "But not the way people think. It wasn't romantic anymore. It's just, we shared something real once. Something that doesn't vanish just because time moves on." Amelia smiled faintly, setting the coffee beside him. "Then let the world say what it wants. They'll always create their own stories." He watched her leave the room, gratitude tightening his throat. She was right, the noise outside didn't have to define him, not anymore. Later that day, Jamie arrived at a scheduled press junket. The air buzzed with whispers. Reporters had already been briefed to get his comment. When his turn came, one journalist leaned forward with a smirk. "Jamie, any thoughts on Dakota Johnson and Chris Martin's reunion? Fans say you looked quite, well, emotional about it." Jamie exhaled, straightening in his seat. "I think it's great," he said evenly. "They're both wonderful people. They deserve happiness." The journalist persisted. "No hard feelings, then?" He smiled politely, though his voice was sharper now. "You can't have hard feelings about something that was never broken. We all move on. That's life." It was a simple response, but the clip went viral within hours. Fans dissected every blink, every pause, every flicker in his expression. "He's lying," some claimed. "He's still in love with her," others wrote. The internet turned his calmness into confession, his poise into heartbreak. By nightfall, Jamie had logged off everything. He sat in his garden, a glass of whiskey in hand, the cold evening air biting at his skin. The world wanted him angry, jealous, undone. But all he felt now was tired, and strangely, peaceful. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. He opened it. "Hey, I saw the chaos. I'm sorry, D." For a long moment, he just stared at the screen. Then he typed back. "Don't be happy. You deserve that." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you for reaching out." The reply came almost instantly. "You'll always mean a lot to me, Jamie. I hope you know that." He smiled, not sadly this time, but with the quiet recognition of something that had finally come full circle. The next evening, paparazzi photos hit the web again. Dakota and Chris walking hand in hand through the streets of Malibu, both laughing freely. For once, Jamie didn't flinch when he saw them. He simply scrolled past the pictures, finishing his coffee, and set his phone down. A week later, he was asked again in another interview. "Jamie, the world's been talking about your reaction to Dakota and Chris. Care to clarify how you really feel? He laughed lightly, shaking his head. People love to turn emotion into scandal. The truth? I'm not furious. I'm human. Sometimes we hold on to people a little longer than we should, but letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It just means you're grateful that it happened. The interviewer fell silent, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Jamie continued, "Love isn't always about endings or reunions. Sometimes it's just about learning, about yourself, about what you value, about who you want to be after everything." When the interview aired, that quote spread across social media, not as gossip but as something different, something wise. Even fans who once speculated about jealousy now wrote, "This is what maturity looks like." That night, Jamie sat on his porch, watching the last light fade over Belfast. He thought about Dakota, about Amelia, about the strange way life weaves people together only to pull them apart again. He thought about how every story, even the messy ones, teaches you something about love. He lifted his glass slightly, as if to toast the past. "To endings," he whispered, "and to the peace that follows." The wind carried his words into the quiet night. Somewhere, in another time zone, Dakota might have smiled without knowing why. And for Jamie Dornan, the man who once lived between truth and fiction, the chaos was finally over. What remained was clarity, calm, and the bittersweet beauty of moving on.